Everyone, I'm Sebastian Kaplar and I'm here to give a little demo about NewWave workflow engine. There were some questions that I wanted to answer, so I think this is the best way to do it and to go a little deeper for all of those who are interested in this project. So let's begin. First, we created the engine, which is now ready to execute different types of processes. NewWave actually has multiple plugins or components which can be loaded separately, and they allow different functionalities. In the example that I have prepared, we use a server, web application, and users and groups. So actually, server and users and groups. Load users and groups is used to load default user group model, and actually I have already prepared the web application. Okay, just a quick note. Idea at one point is to enable loading the data from the external file or using a tool to define the process. In order to replace this entering in the internal model, which we will see here in this example, and someone was actually working on that, and I hope it's going well. Let's take a look at the process. So this return simple process demo shows the example that I have prepared, and let's take a look at it. We use the user management in order to associate the users or groups with the tasks, and it's handy to you using the API in here. We start with the NewWave start event, which can have a description. Description can be anything you want. After description, we want to create a user task, and user task, as you can see, can have an ID, description, name, value, and it can belong to a group or to a specific user. In this example here, I don't want to assign it directly to a user, but to a group with an ID of 1. After creating the task, I want to associate it with a data object. Data object is a class that serves like a kind of wrapper around this valued data object here, which is the entity that we actually want to show and change in our engine. That valued data object can be created in a couple of ways, and there was actually a lot to talk about this, and the version I'm going to show you is actually how it's done right now. Here we have an example by creating an address. Address is a class like any other, which has a couple of instance variables. We can take a look here. And just to mention, ID is really important to have. It's like the only mandatory field. And we create the instance of this class using the example number 3. And also, besides the primitive types, I just want to mention that we also support complex types, like this area here. Originally, when we started working on the engine, I used the instance of the class itself as it is right now, as a value data object. But I realized that that might be cumbersome, because when task is exported to server as JSON and we recompile it at the web application, so after the task finishes, the web app sends the field data back in order to update it. It should be recompiled again and so on. I'll talk about this a bit later, but wanted to clarify this for start. So instead of using data object as it is, we use a NewWave data object class description class, and this class description generator is actually used to get the instance of the class itself. So we can take a look at it. NewWave data object class description, and this class here is the really important part which we use throughout the process and using the engine. So NewWave class description generator basically generates NewWave data object class description from the valued data object by going through instance values and picking up their values, and all that part is achieved using reflection. Let me clarify this part a bit. We have a predefined set of types that can be used as a simple property, and everything not fitting in these simple properties, like I don't know, strings, numbers, booleans, and so on, is observed as a complex property. So for instance, if we have, like in this example, instance variable area, this one here, it is observed as a complex property, which then again has its own simple properties and so on. The other way around, to create the value data object or the NewWave class description, is to create the class manually and to fill its properties. Okay, so now back to the example. The remaining part is to associate a task with the data object, which is achieved using add data output association, this one here. So now the task 1 has associated data object with itself, and it is used throughout the process. After we finished, we create an end event, which is similar to start event and can have a description, of course. And this is the end of our super simple process. The only thing left for now is to connect the dots, and we do that by creating outgoing edges from start event to task 1 and then from task 1 to end event. After creating the process, we create it by passing ID, name for that process, and we need an initial flow element, which is usually start event. I also wanted to make available data objects on the process level, which is achieved using add data object on the process itself, and we can also add description for the user management name. Now the process is ready, and we call add process on the engine where we want to add it and be prepared to start it. After calling start process, the process, as you can see here, I added a little log to show that something has actually started. We can now start accessing it. Starting the process is another interesting part. So for every process instance passed to the engine, one process handler is created. So one process handler per process instance. Simply said, its job is to execute and manipulate the process. So NewWave process handler. And this guy right here, he is the one which will execute and manipulate one process instance. Elements of the process are executed with the NewWave executor and its execute method, and what's going to be executed next is determined by the flow handler, which I'm not going to talk about right now. You can take a look at it yourself. Back to the execute. So NewWave executor has execute method, and what's going to be executed, we can see, is determined based on the element type which is going to be executed. So this is determined by the behavior handler, as I called it, and every handler has its perform execution method, and we can take a look at it right now. For example, we will take a look at the user task event behavior and its perform execution method. In this method here, we want to add this task to the server, or its valued data object, to be precise, right here, which is actually NewWave class description, and here it gets filled with the process, user, and some additional data. Because process handler has an announcer, I want to be subscribed to it and to be notified when can I continue the execution. Execution is of course continued when the user submits a task. So let's log into the application and talk a little about the server. What happened when we add the task to the server. The task is added to the queue and can be obtained at the endpoint for the appropriate user or group. The data is served as JSON. Why JSON? Well, when we talked about it, we could use Stone or something else, but we decided during the discussions that it should be possible for the web application which serves as a client that it doesn't have to be written in Pharo. Although the one for which we provide the implementation is, so this is implemented in C side. And one of the mostly widely used formats for interchange is JSON. This is the client, it's in the C side, as I said, and also uses Magritte framework. C side, for those who don't know, is for building web applications, and Magritte is meta description framework which I use for generating forms, validation, and so on. When the user logs in, he can choose the group, tasks, or tasks assigned to him. We chose the group task here, so let's assign ourselves to this task and we can then perform the task. What happens when the task is fetched is that the web app fetches NewWave class description and then compiles it. Remember, web application is standalone and it can run on separate image, which is why it's necessary to obtain the entity. This task here that we see right now is the one which we pre-filled during the process definition, and we can change the fields or we can execute it and finish our super simple process, as we can see here. Back to the web application. The entities are compiled, and for now they have 1, 2, 3, 4 extension. It will probably be changed, and when the entity is created, Magritte descriptions are generated for it, which are necessary for Magritte in order to generate the form which we saw previously. However, user has the option to custom write Magritte descriptions. For example, this one is custom written, so if the custom description exists, then it's the one that is used. And this would be little deeper dive, but with a really simple and short demo. So for any of those who have questions or want to contribute, to suggest something or something like that, please don't hesitate to ask or to get in touch, and thank you for watching.